a beautiful young girl walked to the door of a young man's house. She looks very excited about today's date. She even prepared a lunchbox as a gift for this special occasion. But the guy doesn't remember having an appointment with her. The confused boy asked who she was, but she didn't seem to understand the question. Apparently, she was Rikun's girlfriend, and her expression was almost hurt when the boy asked that strange thing. She began to get suspicious, thinking there was another reason why the guy didn't let her into the house. Maybe he's two-timing with some girl at the office. She demands to know where the family destroyer is. The boy interrupted and explained that he was not Rikun. Immediately, she apologized profusely for the mistake. It turned out that in her haste to leave home, she forgot to wear her contact lenses. A week has passed since the last time the boy met that strange girl. Suddenly, the boy realized that it was quite noisy outside and discovered that the neighbor next door had moved away. The young man never saw his face, only the movers carrying each piece of furniture out. The young man returned home enjoying the familiar comfort, but just a few minutes later, the doorbell rang again. The boy slowly opened the door and the girl from last week poked her head in to look. She seemed confused, stood still in place, then asked if the guy still remembered her. The boy nodded slightly, still clearly remembering that she was the girlfriend of the neighbor who had just moved away. She closed her eyes, looked tired, then told him that she had just broken up with him a few days ago. The young man expressed his sympathy. She explained that the guy had an affair, or rather, two-timing, despite having a girlfriend as beautiful and devoted as her. Rikun often brings other women into his house for all sorts of reasons, whether it's work or good friends. The boy felt a little angry on her behalf and asked, "What kind of stupid person would do that to a kind young girl like you?" She smiled softly, trying to get rid of the heavy feeling to change the atmosphere. She said she came here today to apologize for the inconvenience she caused during her previous visit. She gently held out a small paper bag. Inside was a cake she had made herself. The young man smiled reassuringly, saying there was no problem. The young man invited her into his house and offered to make her a cup of tea. Looks like she just had a rough day. The boy's invitation surprised her, and her eyes lit up. She smiled brightly, happily accepted the invitation, and entered the boy's apartment. She seemed excited to spend some time with the boy, although she still politely apologized for disturbing him. Unfortunately, the boy didn't notice her strange look as she quietly closed the door behind him. The boy apologized for the mess in the house because he was not prepared to welcome guests, but she just smiled, didn't pay any attention, and said that the boy's room was actually tidier than he described. The boy wondered if she was just being polite or genuinely complimenting him. The young man was about to go to the kitchen to cut and serve the cake. He asked her if she was willing to wait a bit while he made tea. She looked up, explaining that the cake was too small to cut into individual portions. She told the boy not to worry about her part, and that she would be happy if he enjoyed it himself. She called the boy's name Ikuto, and at that moment the boy's mind suddenly realized something strange. He had never told her his name. Ikuto turned back to look at the girl and asked how she knew his name. She quickly made up a reason that some of his letters had accidentally been delivered to her ex-boyfriend's mailbox in the past, and she remembered his name because it was quite special. This explanation seemed reasonable, so Ikuto didn't think much more about it. She apologized for startling him a bit, and she looked truly apologetic. Then she realized that she hadn't introduced herself. She said her name was Yue, and commented that it seemed like fate had arranged for the two of them to meet. She hopes that we can get along. Ikuto feels a bit confused at the thought of getting closer to Yue, especially since she just broke up with his neighbor. There were clearly many warning signs, but it seemed he was colorblind once again, not realizing that her eyes were gradually losing their radiance. Ikuto carefully opened the cake that Yue had made for him. The decoration of the small cake was so beautiful, it even included strawberries, his favorite fruit. She hoped the cake was to Ikuto's taste and watched anxiously as he began to eat. Ikuto took a fork and noticed Yue's eyes staring intently at him. Ikuto tells her that she is making him nervous. Finally, Ikuto took a bite of the cake and realized it was really delicious. Yue looked extremely relieved. She explained that it had been a while since she made the cake again, and added medicine, so she was worried that Ikuto would notice something different in the taste. Wait, did you just say quit smoking? Ikuto's head suddenly became foggy. His vision became blurred. He should have been frightened, but strangely he felt strangely peaceful. Ikuto saw a suspicious smile appear on Yue's face. Everything went dark, and the last thing Ikuto heard was Yue wishing him good night. When I woke up, Ikuto's head hurt, and he couldn't remember what happened. Yue was here a second ago, and then Ikuto felt something soft and warm on his cheek. Ikuto opened his eyes and saw Yue looking down at him. Her hand seemed to caress him as he slept. Ikuto asked how he fell asleep like that. She explained that he must have been tired after a day of work. Ikuto accepted her explanation without question, but then realized his head was resting on her thigh. Too embarrassed and to maintain the minimum politeness, Ikuto quickly jumped up. This was definitely not something Ikuto would usually do with a girl. Ikuto had just met Yue, but she giggled and reassured her that there was nothing to worry about, because she really enjoyed watching Ikuto's sleeping face. Ikuto really didn't know how to react to that. I just felt confused. I couldn't believe I fell asleep on Yue's lap like that. Even though Ikuto has been working a lot of overtime lately, but looking outside, Ikuto realized it was already past 6 p.m. Yue suddenly exclaimed, then hurriedly prepared to leave, thinking he had stayed too long. Ikuto apologizes for not being more welcoming to her, but Yue reassures her that it's okay. Yue boldly asked if it was possible to visit Ikuto again. Seeing that there was no problem, Ikuto said that he would be happy if she stopped by. Yue smiled happily, saying that she was also looking forward to meeting Ikuto next time. After Yue left, Ikuto returned to her room, dreamily thinking about Yue's cuteness. But I still couldn't help but wonder why he fell asleep like that. Ikuto noticed that the dishes had been washed and put away neatly, while the room looked even tidier than usual. Yue must have cleaned the house while Ikuto was unaware. Ikuto almost felt guilty about that. Meanwhile, Yue clutched a key to Ikuto's apartment in her hand. She happily hung clothes to dry because today was laundry day. Yue accidentally touches Ikuto's underwear. She almost backed away in embarrassment. But even though she was embarrassed, she still told herself to do her best for Ikuto. No matter what, she is planning to become his ideal girlfriend. That evening, Ikuto returned home and felt strange to see the laundry already hanging out to dry. Ikuto quickly called his mother to ask if she would stop by his house. Mom immediately denied it, claiming that Ikuto's spare key was still at her house. Ikuto immediately planned to go to his mother's house to get the key back. Something was wrong, but Ikuto couldn't put his finger on exactly what. Meanwhile, Yue, with a perfect disguise, happily listened to something on her phone. It turns out Yue was eavesdropping on Ikuto's conversation with his mother. Yue giggled when she heard Ikuto think that his mother went a long way just to do his laundry. Yue thought Ikuto was stupid. A few days later, Yue quietly observed Ikuto from afar as he entered the office. She could barely contain her excitement at seeing Ikuto looking so handsome in a suit, and she trembled with happiness. A few men happened to notice Yue. Attracted by her beautiful appearance and seductive body, they decided to approach her to start a conversation. They tried to flirt with Yue, inviting her to go out and have fun with them. However, Yue's eyes immediately darkened, completely losing her benevolence. With a cold and sharp voice, she said that she was waiting for the man she loved and asked them to leave immediately. Even better, Yue told them to stop breathing. One of the guys whispered to his friend that this girl was really not okay at all, and it would be best if they left her alone. The other guy burst out laughing, thinking that his friend was a coward for being afraid of such a thing. But the first guy insisted that they should leave immediately. At exactly 6 p.m., Ikuto walked out of the office after a rare day of finishing work early. "I'm tired," and carelessly bumped into a girl, knocking her bag to the ground. It turns out that girl is Yue. Ikuto thought this was an interesting coincidence. Yue seemed pleasantly surprised when she saw Ikuto. She explained that she had closed the store early to do a little shopping. Ikuto was still quite surprised to meet her, but was even more surprised to learn that she owned and operated a store. While helping Yue retrieve her bag, Ikuto's hand accidentally touched her hand. He could almost clearly hear Yue's heart beating rapidly. Yue said that she bought a lot of things today, so she planned to invite him somewhere. However, before she could finish her sentence, she was interrupted by a cheerful call of "senpai" from one of Ikuto's subordinates. Ikuto didn't notice, but Yue seemed to almost lose her composure. A cheerful, short-haired girl ran up to them. Ikuto immediately recognized that energetic attitude and characteristic buck teeth. It was Adano, his bright and energetic subordinate, inviting him out for a drink. Adano finally recognized Yue and immediately asked who she was. Before Yue could declare herself Ikuto's girlfriend, Adano did it for her. She loudly asks if Yue is Ikuto's girlfriend. Ikuto hastily denies, saying she misunderstood. He quickly explains that Yue is just the ex-girlfriend of his old neighbor, and after some incidents, the two became friends. When Adano understood the situation, she felt extremely relieved. And that relief couldn't escape Yue's sharp eyes. Yue looked at Adano with eyes that seemed to want to pierce through this interloper. Adano called Matsuda, another of Ikuto's co-workers, and told him that Ikuto could join them for a drink. But wait, Ikuto hasn't even said anything yet. He was also worried that Yue might feel lost. Adano pulled Matsuda close, and as soon as he saw Yue, he seemed instantly attracted. Matsuda introduces himself as one of Ikuto's colleagues, and Yue politely nodded. Adano waved goodbye to Yue, then tried to drag Ikuto along with her and Matsuda. But Ikuto remembered that Yue was still talking to him, so he tried to ask again what she just said. Matsuda, upon hearing that Ikuto had a plan, almost let him go. But for some reason, he kept silent. Yue smiled bravely, reassuring Ikuto that she could visit him at any time. She happily promises to make some cookies for him next time, and Ikuto eagerly looks forward to it. Adano loudly urged Matsuda to do that, and immediately Matsuda wrapped his arm around Ikuto's shoulders, pulling him towards the group's favorite bar. Adano greeted Yue again, and Ikuto also waved goodbye from afar. Yue, with a smile on her face, also waved back. However, as soon as Ikuto and the group were out of earshot, Yue and Adano looked at each other as if wanting to duel with piercing eyes. In their mind, there can only be one. Ikuto sat down with Matsuda and Adano at the familiar counter of their favorite bar. It was a crowded Friday evening. Adano started talking about the traffic accident they had just seen on the way here. She expressed her fear when witnessing that scene. Matsuda added that a car had hit two young men, and he was worried about their condition. Ikuto nodded, showing sympathy because that was truly a terrible thing. Adano said she felt a little nervous about having to go home alone after witnessing such an accident. However, Ikuto's mind involuntarily wandered to Yue, who he knew also had to walk home by herself. Noticing that Ikuto was engrossed in thinking about something, Adano glanced over and asked him what he was thinking. Ikuto frankly admitted that he was thinking about Yue and worried about her safety. This seemed to make Adano a bit upset. She became upset, blaming that she was here right in front of Ikuto, but he was worried about someone else. Ikuto stammered an apology, trying to calm the situation. Matsuda, with a cheerful attitude, joked that he was also here. But Adano immediately stepped on his foot with his shoe heel, making him yelp. Adano reassures Ikuto that Yue will be fine going home alone. Meanwhile, Yue has begun her investigation work, utilizing her natural searching skills to gather every detail of Adano's life. For example, Yue discovered that Adano was 24 years old, her parents were healthy, and most importantly, Adano lived alone. At the bar, Matsuda stood up and went to the bathroom, leaving Ikuto alone with Adano, who was a bit drunk. Adano asked Ikuto if he wasn't planning on drinking anymore. He replied that he had had enough to drink, but he expressed concern about her having to go home alone. Adano sat up straight and insisted that she would be fine. However, she shared that she was a bit worried about something. Ikuto asked what was bothering her. And suddenly, Adano reached out towards him with both hands. She asked if Ikuto would be willing to go somewhere with her, just the two of them. Ikuto was stunned by this sudden invitation. His hands trembled, not knowing how to react. He snatched his hand back and apologized. He explained that they'd both had a bit too much to drink, and whatever important things Adano was thinking about were probably better left for next week. Adano, who seemed almost broken by Ikuto's answer, sat there with a disappointed look in his eyes. When Matsuda returned to the table, the whole group walked towards the door together. They walked a short distance to the intersection, where they each went their separate ways. Ikuto entrusts Adano's safety to Matsuda, and Matsuda reassures her that she will be safe. Matsuda and Adano pass through a rather deserted street. Matsuda comments that Adano seems a bit cold tonight. Adano immediately told him to shut his useless mouth. They stopped near a store, and Matsuda asked permission to leave for a moment. Suddenly, Adano received a call from an unknown number. She picked up the phone, said hello to the seemingly silent line, but then heard a familiar voice. Yue asked Idano if she liked the small gathering with Ikuto. A warning sounded in Adano's head. She recognized Yue's voice, although she was a bit surprised by this sudden call. Adano immediately asked Yue how she got his phone number. However, Yue did not answer Adano's question. Instead, she apologized for calling at such a late hour and asked Adano to help her with a little favor. Yue recounted her argument with her ex-boyfriend, admitting that perhaps she was partly at fault for not warning the girl he cheated on. This time she was determined not to repeat that mistake. Yue asks Adano to promise not to approach Ikuto again if she still values her life. Adano almost laughed, even though she didn't have a glass of water in her hand. She burst into laughter, unable to believe what she just heard. After regaining her composure, Adano replied that she and Ikuto were simply colleagues, one junior and one senior with absolutely nothing to worry about. Yue thanked Adano for the cooperation and said she would believe her. However, at that moment in the darkness, it seemed like someone was approaching Adano. A few minutes later, Matsuda returned, arms full of water bottles. He noticed Adano seemed strange and asked her what was wrong. Adano smiled, shook her head, and said she had changed her mind. Later, when Ikuto was about to go to sleep, he was unaware of what was happening outside. Ikuto felt a little worried that he might have rejected Adano too harshly, but he also couldn't say he was thinking about Yue when Adano invited him out alone. Tired and exhausted, Ikuto was about to go to bed when he heard the doorbell ring. The bell rang twice more, followed by 2 rapid knocks. He wondered who could come to visit him at this hour. Looking through the peephole, Ikuto saw Matsuda trying to support an obviously drunk Adano. He quickly opened the door and asked Matsuda what happened. Matsuda explained that he and Adano had another round of drinks, but when he left for a few minutes, he returned to find her completely drunk. Since he doesn't know where she lives, he has no choice but to take her to Ikuto. Ikuto placed his hands on his hips, rubbed his temples, and sighed. He knew that he couldn't leave Adano in this condition, so he agreed to let Matsuda take her into the house until she woke up. Matsuda gently sat Idano on the floor and carefully removed her shoes. But suddenly he asked permission to leave, arguing that he had to get up early tomorrow morning. Matsuda leaves, leaving Ikuto alone with a drunk Adano. Ikuto felt uncomfortable letting a female colleague into his house at this hour, but he had no other choice because Adano was completely unable to go home on his own in such a state. He helped Adano into his apartment and asked her to drink some water while she waited. However, Ikuto did not notice the mischievous smile slowly appearing on Adano's face. Outside, Matsuda was on his way home with a worried and anxious look on his face. He hoped that he had done the right thing by leaving Adano with Ikuto.